Hola a todos, bienvenidos a un nuevo episodio de Elef, a very special episode. Para todos los que nos escuchan en español, este episodio va a ser en inglés, porque nuestra invitada habla inglés, pero vale la pena escucharlo, entenderlo, va a ser maravilloso. Así que now we turn to English. Miriam, Anzovin, welcome. How are you doing?
Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to be here. This is super exciting. Thank you.
My pleasure. And this is one of the, the miracles of Twitter. Yes? Like a couple of, weeks or months ago, I was asking around who should I invite to PLF. Usually are Spanish-speaking rabbis, scholars, Jewish activists. But every once in a while, someone comes from Israel or the US that only speak English or do not speak Spanish and speak other languages. They're also invited just because it's a privilege to me to talk to people that I admire, that I like, that I want to learn from them, but also to share this name, this person, their activity to Spanish-speaking Jews and non-Jews that are interested in Judaism. So Miriam, this was my introduction. Okay, Miriam Anzovin, and many of us know you from DAF reactions, right?
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit let's start with what DAF reactions is, and then you tell us a little bit more about who is Miriam Anzovin, your relationship with the Talmud and gender, and we start the conversation from there. But I think most of us, or you became famous, I don't know what is famous or not in this world.
Jewish famous, quote unquote, Jewish famous.
Yes, yeah. Jewish famous with DAF reactions. So tell me a little bit about that.
Sure thing. So let me start with explaining my obsession with TikTok, because that really comes before anything else. In the beginning, there was TikTok. For the last 2-ish years, actually approximately the same time, I've been doing Daf Yomi, funnily enough. But during the pandemic, like so many people out there, who felt so isolated turned to social media platforms, including TikTok, to connect with other people. And because comedy is a big part of TikTok, it was so incredible to me to get to go to that app, watch videos, little brief videos, they can't be more than like 3 minutes, that people post from all around the world showing their way of life, things that they love and are obsessed with, things that they're doing. And I learned so much about other people, and I enjoy their content so much that after 2 years of lurking, I decided, well, I'm doing Daf Yomi. Maybe I could do a video about my reactions to what I am encountering in the text. I had been studying it all this time with a chavruta, my study partner, and because he had very little background with the Talmud before we started in this most recent Daf Yomi cycle, I had just a small amount more, a little bit about more. So what we would do is we would read through the text together, and then I would give it back over, but in the way that he and I would talk about anything that we were excited about, whether it was a Marvel Cinematic Universe film or Game of Thrones or a book we love, or something happening in our real lives or in the world. This is the way I talked about the Daf, and he would laugh. And that was always such a joy to me, because it wasn't necessarily that he was laughing at what we were learning, although some of it is quite funny. And I say that with a lot of love.
About, right?
Oh, it is.
About
and
humor in the Talmud. I think there's a lot of there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's actually a great source of comedy, both intentional and unintentional, but I absolutely love it. So anyway, he would laugh at the way I was talking about it, at the very, there was a lot of slang, some cursing, because that is how I speak when I'm excited about anything, and I'm very, I've got a lot of emphasis I want to add to something, using the same references that I would use in our normal everyday conversation about anything. And that was very gratifying to me, that we could go on this journey, this learning journey together. And even when we encountered things that to us as people here in 5782 to 2022, or actually, when we started in 2020, some of the things in the Talmud are very alien to us in our experience now, as he and I are both American Jews. And some of it is actually quite remarkably relevant, but the the way in which we could engage with it was through doing it this way. And then later on, about a year later, a year into Daf Yomi, he and I hosted this podcast called The Vibe of the Tribe. It's no longer in existence, but it was all about Jewish things happening in around the greater Boston area. And we had two rabbis guests on the podcast, and we were talking about our first year of Daf Yomi. And I remember talking about it. I talked about a specific daf, Shabbat 110, which has a lot to do with women, and I made it very comedic. And I remember looking up at the Zoom screen, quite similar to how you and I are on now, but it was two of them and my chavruta, and everyone was like crying with laughter. So that made me think, do I have an idea here? Is there something? Is there an audience? Maybe. So in December of this past year, not even a year ago, in 2021, I started filming little brief videos, and I called them Daf reactions. And the first one, I didn't even say any of my now sort of known phrases like Shalom friends. That's how I begin every episode, with Shalom friends. I didn't know to do that at the time, and I started in some random Daf in Tractate Ta'anit, but it lent itself well to a retelling in modern millennial parlance. It really lent itself to that kind of discussion, because in the story you have the wife of one of the sages, and she is really trying to prepare Shabbat, but she doesn't have any challah, and her neighbor comes over to kind of make her feel bad about it, essentially, that she has nothing cooking in the oven for Shabbat. And the miracle that happens is that a challah appears in the oven, and she does actually have
the wife of Hanina Mendoza.
Exactly. And in that moment, I knew how we would currently describe that neighbor. She was a Karen. So in that first episode, I described her as that. This is exactly something we would be familiar with in our modern day life. And from there, I thought like 5, 10, 15 people at most would be interested in this. Maybe modern students like myself, millennials, perhaps maybe younger women, perhaps, who were encountering Talmud for the first time. And that's a careful and challenging dance at times. Maybe they would appreciate, and we could all kind of get something out of these little videos. And what actually happened was, a month later, in January, I released a video for Moed Katan 9, and that went viral. And within 48 hours, I went from being able to respond to any message or comment that anyone was giving me to being unable to do so, because there were so many comments,
what was
reactions coming in.
Moed Katan, the beginning.
Moed Katan 9. So I'll tell you exactly what happens in this daf, because it, to this day, is absolutely one of my favorites. And it's truly the moment where it all clicked for me. And I realized Talmud is time travel. And sometimes there is a long gap to leap from now to then. And sometimes I am right there with them, almost in the room. That's the magic of studying Talmud. So in the daf, we have Rav Chisda, who I'm a major fan of, and I say that in the video. Rav Chisda stan, ride or die. And they are talking, him and Rav Huna are having a conversation about whether it is okay for a woman to apply makeup on Chol HaMoed, on the intermediate days of a festival holiday. And Rav Huna is saying, it's okay, but only for young women, not old women like your wife. And he says that to Rav Chisda. And before I even got to reading Rav Chisda's response, I went, oh my God, because I was so mad. And then I got to Rav Chisda's response, and it begins with, my God. And even now my hair stands up on end, because I realized, oh, wow, no, we're the same. He and I are having the exact same response.
That's a reaction, the
moment.
reaction.
Yes, exactly. My real, authentic, immediate reaction to what I'm encountering in the text. These are my real thoughts and feelings as I'm learning, that I share then in these little videos. But that was the first one that really, I think, I understood how powerful this could be, how it really changed my life to understand this this connection with the sages, despite the time and the distance and all of the other things that are in between us. And people responded to that video very strongly. They had their own reactions, DAF reactions for several reasons, which I completely understand. The first being who I am. I'm a secular woman. I am not Orthodox anymore, even though I was raised as an Orthodox person, and we can certainly talk about that later. But I'm a secular woman doing Daf Yomi and making TikToks about it and using the vocabulary, including swears that.
But in the Talmud appears some swearing too.
Oh, yes. Thank you for bringing that up, because I bring that up all the time to people who, are so like shocked. They're shocked and appalled. And yet I have a whole book on my bookshelf called Talmudic Insults.
I have it too.
I love that book. I have a series of videos where I share some of my favorite. Yeah, it's a great book. I have actually a series where I share some of my favorites. I call them burn offerings, insults from the Talmud as I encounter them. And some of them are indeed from that book. But you're entirely right. There is swearing in the Talmud. The Talmud contains all things. It is highly not safe for work. And when people first started to really have a problem after seeing that video, because nobody had paid attention to me before, they're just like, shocked, appalled. How could you be talking about it like this? And I'm like, have you not studied the Talmud? Because my videos might not be safe for work, but the Talmud sure isn't either.
Sure.
But that was the start of this.
And now tell me a little bit about the numbers. All about TikTok is about numbers, and you became famous.
It is. I will say that, I'm amazed that I got this far on Talmud content, which I never thought in a million years would be possible. I just crossed last week, I believe, the 1 million views on DAF reactions content, which is absolutely bonkers to me. I have 20,000 followers on TikTok. I think 15,000 on Instagram, over 10,000 on Twitter. I've got some on YouTube, even though that's not my primary space to operate. I just post things there for people who aren't on Instagram or TikTok, but want to see it anyway. I know people also download and share the videos on WhatsApp, which please share the links, not download the video so that I can get those views. Thank you. And I'm very grateful for everybody who shares the videos and, sends people, introduce their friends and family to the videos. I
really do not know how I got there. I think I do not use TikTok. I'm a little bit older generation. I don't know if older, but my wife loves TikTok, but I cannot stand TikTok. So I'm not there because I know that I will spend hours in TikTok. I have a kind of addiction. So I try to control myself.
I have spent so much time on TikTok. Again, 2 years of just being a TikTok consumer before I ever posted my first video. One of my regrets is that now I don't have enough time to just watch other people's content. And that's something that it makes me sad, because to be honest, making the videos, each video, which is 3 minutes, right, takes 6 hours to produce. It is an entire day project.
6 hours per.
That includes obviously the learning component, because I try to be right. I make a point of saying that I am not a Talmud teacher. I am just encountering the Talmud and sharing what I'm getting out of it as I go. I'm a co-learner with everybody else who's learning Daf Yomi around the world. So learning it is a big part of the production process. I mean, obviously I do that every day, even if I don't produce a video for that particular daf. I don't do it for every daf.
So not every daf has a reaction. There's
no.
Because you find those pages of the Talmud that even myself, I started. I also had a relationship with Daf Yomi. I started in, I think, 2011, the first cycle that I started. But then Blogspot was what was current in the world, Blogspot. So I started writing in Spanish, some short, 1 paragraph. And then there were some pages of the Talmud says, what in the name of Hashem I'm going to write here? Like, sometimes there's a good story or a good halachic debate, something interesting to share with people today, because we want it to be meaningful. It's not a yeshiva like the Miriam yeshiva that all the people is important about Tuman Tara. But things that a story, a saying, a quote, something that will be meaningful. And then I changed it to, I have now Spotify or whatever, but I get like in Spanish, 50, 60, 70 people that learn with me. So it's amazing.
That's pretty incredible.
Yeah, yes. It's okay. I will, that's also for me, it's an encouragement. So I study, because if I don't have that pressure of, I know that there's someone else in the world waiting for me to learn a little bit more of Talmud in 5 minutes in the car, maybe I will skip a little bit. But knowing that there's somebody waiting for you, I think, I don't know how you feel it.
Yeah, I feel the exact same way. In fact, I think at the point that I started recording DOF reactions, I had already gone through several tractates or several chunks of tractates that I was like, I feel like I'm not paying as much attention. I'm not as engaged with it, because sometimes, as you know very well, the debates and discussions are so granular on issues of halacha that you just are like, okay, we get the point. We get the point. I understand why they have to have those conversations, and yet not all pages lend themselves to an entertaining video. And if I did one every single day for the entire 7.5-year cycle, I would lose my mind. So I'm trying to pace myself as well.
And it will be like your only job, because it's 6 hours a day. Like,
yes.
And I want to reach that, but something that for me, I just wanted to say it clearly, it's just the world that we live today, and the Jewish world in particular, and the learning opportunities is just amazing.
Amazing.
I think we are in one of those moments of the history. This may be the greatest moment of Jewish learning in all times. Even we have this idea of Yeridat Adorot, that each generation learns more, studies more, or connects less. There was never in the history of the world too many Jews studying Talmud. And it's the first generation that non-Orthodox or very conservative, observant Jews study Talmud. You can have a Latin, like liberal rabbi like myself, and a secular. You live in Boston, right, Miriam?
Yep.
Boston Jew. I'm in the 30s. I don't know.
I'm also in my 30s. Yes.
Okay. Like with truth and just spreading the word of Talmud in the way that we feel it, we encounter it, and it's just amazing. And also using all these social medias at all the time. We see a lot of hatred going around, and a lot of gossiping, and a lot of fake news, and a lot of things that we do not like. But just having 1 million views, okay, of thousands of hundreds of people around the world, just learning one quote, one story, one law from the Talmud from you, is like dayenu. It's like
yes, I have to say that in my entire life, I've had many Jewish experiences of one type or another. As I mentioned, I was raised in an Orthodox family, or rather we were a Baal Tshuva family who became religious together, and then life happened and I'm no longer religious. But this moment is actually the most powerful and meaningful Jewish moment in my life to me, to have people say to me, wow, I was bored out of my mind learning about Judaism when I was in, school, or I never understood it. I never got why we did this, or what the excitement is, or what the point is. And then I watched your videos and I thought, why didn't this exist before? Well, probably because the internet wasn't as readily available. TikTok wasn't a thing. I didn't create videos at that point. I mean, to be completely honest and fair, people have been doing incredibly creative content relating to the DAF, particularly online, way before I started, and the movement to have more secular or non-Orthodox people and women engaged in the learning has been going on for a really long time. And I benefit from all of that. I benefit from every woman who has learned prior to me, who have paved the way for me to be able to do this. One of the people I listen to when I learn is Rabbanit Michelle Farber, who has the Hadron organization and then her podcast, and I listen to her teach. And frankly, I only want to hear women teach Talmud, to be fair. But again,
that's
exactly.
Let's talk about that.
We can definitely talk about that. But I just wanted to speak to what you had mentioned before about the accessibility that we have now. I mean, I rely so heavily on Sefaria. What an incredible resource, because I would not have been able to afford buying the whole Babylonian Talmud. That would have been absolutely impossible, prohibitive to me. And so the cost alone would have been a deterrent for me doing this learning. And the real moment that I knew I wanted to do this was several years ago when Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory came and he spoke at my past workplace, and it was like a lunch and learn, and I'm sitting there in the corner eating my lunch, and he's talking about Daf Yomi, and he's talking about how incredible it is to be able to be literally on the same page with Jews all around the world who are different from you, who live completely differently, different places, different backgrounds, and yet we are united in this, and how beautiful that was. And I remember coming back and emailing my mom, I think I might do Daf Yomi when the new cycle starts. And that was a big impetus for me going on this journey.
Amazing. And Miriam, now we know a little bit more about what Daf reaction is, the history of this short history. God willing, it will be a long history, but just with just a couple of chapters of Rakim of the recent history. Tell me a little bit about you. Now I know you're secular. I know you live in Boston. You are Orthodox. Tell me a little bit, and whoever is listening or watching us, who is Miriam? What did you study? How is your family? Who is Miriam?
So I am the middle child. Let's start there because we always have to entertain people, the middle child. My family is a Baal Tshuva family, or was a Baal Tshuva family. My mother, who was in a secular family, she started to get really interested in Judaism when she was in college. And so that was a journey that she had gone on in her life. And as we, as young kids, were on this journey with her. I remember going from Reform temple to a conservative congregation, and then we stopped driving on Shabbat, so we would just go to the local Chabad house because we were near a college campus. And I went to a Chabad Lubavitch day school for several years, 6th through 8th grade. Really invested in the religious aspect myself, not only because of my mother's journey at that point, but also because of my own. And then I got my degree in Judaic studies after homeschooling myself from 9th grade to college. And
part of the homeschooling.
Yes, I homeschooled myself.
Because of like Orthodox or like
yes, exactly. Okay. The school I attended, the day school I attended, only went through 8th grade. Many people in that school would then send their kids off to a different school, but Western Massachusetts was not abundant in high school opportunities for me, at least. So because my older brother had also started homeschooling, that was the choice that we as a family made. And it gave me several tools being homeschooling myself. One is self-directed learning, which Daf Yomi does require a lot of, and the ability to focus on what I really want to learn and what I'm passionate about. So one of the things that I am is a massive nerd. My father read Lord of the Rings to me when I was 4. And that shaped so much of who I am. And I think about Judaism the same way. I am a massive nerd for Judaism, and it has shaped me so profoundly in ways that I don't even fully understand at this point in my life, in my 30s. I remember being super, super young. I don't know how old. And my uncle said, you have to bow to the inevitable. And I remember thinking back to the story of Mordechai not bowing in front of Haman. And I said, I bow to nobody. And he thought, oh, that was funny. But the truth was that came directly from my immediate mental connection between what was happening in my life in that moment and a Jewish text. So even very early, I began to make these constant connections and constant associations. So I had many interests in that period of my life when I was homeschooling myself, creative ones. I'm an artist in addition to being a writer and now a performer. At that point, I wasn't a performer, although that has become my main artistic expression. But it was a time of really learning how to be fully creative and self-reliant in many, many ways. When I went to college, I had a much broader experience with interacting with Jewish people who I did not necessarily have a background with before. I learned so much about different ways of embodying Judaism, different aspects of Jewish history. For example, my family, we are mostly Ashkenazi, but partially Sephardi. And I was riveted to find out more about Sephardic culture and literature. That was a big part of my learning, my obsession and learning, and also learn about other forms of Judaism that I did not even know about. I learned about Bukharan Jews. I learned so much that was different from what I had been exposed to before. That was also a profoundly changing experience for me. That changed how I understood myself, my place in the Jewish people, and understood other people's places in our history as well, in a better way than I had before. During my college years, towards the ends of my college years, even though I had started by being incredibly devout, just like dressing very modestly, skirts over my pants, longer sleeves, I would get up and daven mincha in the middle of class because I didn't care. I was just going to do it. I was my little rebellion of being super Jewish. Towards the end of my college time, unfortunately, my father got really sick. He had cancer. He passed away. And several other really horrific things happened in the same year, including my grandfather dying, my dog dying, many, many, many other bad things. And I had never thought of myself as being a person who would turn away from Judaism because of personal difficulties. I mean, we all know so many stories of people throughout our history who have, instead of being pulled away during difficult times, have used faith to remain strong or stay strong. I mean, certainly we've all probably heard very moving stories about that. But to me, the more I learned about Judaism and the more I began to see, especially in relating to issues surrounding how women are treated in Orthodoxy, I had more and more of a problem with it, and I could not justify it. I couldn't explain it away. There's a lot of apologist kind of thinking that goes on in why women are treated differently. And the gaslighting is, it's because you're special. It's because you're on a pedestal, because you're better than the men. That's why this is happening. And yet that's not how people are actually treated. And after a point, I didn't really notice when this happened exactly, but I no longer felt in my heart a belief that I had been so sure of before. And because of that really horrifying realization that, oh, wow, I don't know if I believe in a God anymore. How can I be Jewish in the way I thought I should be Jewish? Because I really thought that being Orthodox was the only way to be really Jewish, which I know now is not the case, but I thought that at the time. I pulled back after I graduated. I pulled back from pretty much every aspect of being a Jewish person in my everyday life. I worked at a lot of, actually my entire career has been in Jewish nonprofits, and that was my sort of connection to the community. But I myself was not actively embodying anything particularly Jewish. And then when the new cycle was about to start, and I had been thinking about it, I had been inspired by Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs. Right at the end of 2019, there was a series of truly horrific anti-Semitic attacks in New Jersey and New York around Hanukkah, really awful. And I remember thinking to myself, no one knows that I'm Jewish because I don't do anything Jewish. I'm not dressing in a way that would identify me as such, even though I'm wearing a Torah on my shirt right now. But
now you would be.
Oh, right. I'm not visibly Jewish, as people say, so I'm not doing anything. So what can I do? And I didn't want to be a hypocrite. I thought that I couldn't really do anything ritual. I could not do davening. I couldn't take that on, but I could study. I could learn, because not only is there a spiritual element that people can have during studying, but it doesn't have to be present. It's also studying our history, our peoplehood. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do something every single day for 7.5 years that allies myself with my Jewish siblings around the world and places me in Jewish continuity and places me in relationship with Jews throughout history. It's going to be my 7.5 year middle finger to anti-Semites. So that's how really I thought about it. I wrote about it. Actually, the second day of Daf Yomi, I published an article called An Atheist Does Daf Yomi, and it was all about why I had made this choice and how my lack of faith was actually more of a motivator for me to engage in other ways. I can't force myself to believe. That's just not possible. Contrary to what people tell me on the internet, you just can't do it. But that didn't mean that I really had to separate myself entirely from our history, our Jewish literacy, anything like that. I didn't actually have to do it. And this was the way that I manifested that.
So some, when you're talking, I'm thinking about one quote, one or two stories that appear at the very end of Tragedy Yevamot. So maybe Miriam, you remember?
Yevamot.
Yes. Don't let me talk. But you know what? At the end, it wasn't so bad. Yes, it's what let me share with people. Like there's some tractates of the Talmud. There are 39 tractates of the Talmud. There's some that you want to just get over, okay? Just get done, like Tractate Eruvin, Tractate Yevamot, are those tractates that you want, what? They're so dry in so many ways that you say, why Hashem? Why you make rabbis discuss? But at the end but there's nice stories, there's nice halachas, family relationship, very weird combinations where your son could be your father and your spouse at the same time, and then you have many problems with that. But at the end, it's a story about how Rabbi Akiva or Rabban Gamliel, those two stories, they are like, there's a big storm and their boat, how do you say it?
Collapses, capsizes,
something like that. And they ask how you were safe. And Rabbi Akiva answered, a daf saved me, like a little plank. Plank is not only, daf is not only one page, but it's also a plank of the boat saved me. I hung into the plank and I came into the coast again. It's like Yonah being expelled from that. So it's a beautiful story how the daf yomi also safe.
You picked out like the one good part about Yevamot. And I congratulate you. I will say that Yevamot, I thought was the worst until I started Ketubot. And I was not prepared. I thought it would be better. It's not. In fact, I have a weird nostalgia for Yevamot now.
Just come back. Adran Allah. Now you really want to come back to Tractate Yevamot.
I truly never believed I could possibly feel that way about Tractate Yevamot. That was, at the time, the most challenging one, even with, Eruvin and how deeply dry, as you say, that tractate is. Yevamot was absolutely unhinged. And sometimes it was entertaining in its unhingedness, but a lot of the times it was...
Yes, all those stories.
I did get some very popular DAF reactions videos out of that. And yet it was so challenging that during, the I don't know, more than 100 plus days that we spent, I think we started in March or something, and we didn't end until July. I introduced like 5 new series. I did Exodus reactions for Passover and Megillah reactions for Purim and DAF reactions dictionary where I explain all the terms. I did the insult series. Like I started so many different series as a way to escape Yevamot.
Escape from Yevamot. But yes, still it's part of the 7.5 years. Yes,
it's
still.
You can't
skip. It's like that quote at the end of Brachot, Torai belidmod ani tzarich. This is also Torah. Yep. And I need to learn. And
this too is Torah.
I think you didn't start, but that's a page of the Talmud that deserves a good reaction.
Oh yeah, it absolutely does. Although that story does appear elsewhere, and I think I have talked about it in the subsequent.
Can you tell us a little bit of that story? Just for the audience today.
Yeah, so it first appears in Tractate Brachot, as you said, and I forget actually who is hiding under the bed. Okay, so
I think it's Rabbi, say Rabbi, whoever.
Yeah, I think you might be right. So Rav is having sex with his wife at home, and under their bed is hiding one of Rav's students because he wants to find out the correct way to have sex, and that's how he decided to find out. And when they find him under there, I mean, we don't hear what Rav's wife said, although I'm keenly interested in her take on this. But Rav is like, this is very inappropriate. Why are you why are you here? And he's like, this is Torah, I must learn. He's basically saying, well, everything in life is Torah. I have to learn all of it. So that's why I'm here listening to you guys have sex. Which is one of the most iconic pages, one of the most iconic stories that people bring up. And it's just so funny for several reasons. But and
then also there's another story of one rabbi following the other rabbi into the bathroom,
yep,
right?
That happens in Brachot as well. Brachot is so
to learn how to sweep their ass, literally.
Yeah. Tell people what is in the Talmud. They're like, no. And I'm like, yes. And again, I don't believe in skipping any of it. I have missed only 2 days of the entire cycle thus far, and I was sick. But I went back and did them after. I just want to clarify, because sometimes people say, oh, this is so upsetting. You're going to be so upset by this. You should just skip. No, that's not what we're doing here. My goal is to learn everything that's in the Talmud, good, bad, ugly, funny, joyous, traumatizing,
I want
whatever.
to stop you there, because we start reading Ketuvot.
Yeah.
And Ketuvot, I wrote a tweet a couple of days ago. Maybe it's the tractate that is the main constitution of man's planning ever written. Okay.
Yeah.
It's like everything that you shouldn't do is in tractate Ketuvot.
Yeah.
So and it's interesting. This many Jews in the last 200 years, things that they didn't like about the Jewish tradition, that they didn't feel comfortable. It wasn't morally what they were. It thought it was irrational. The way to deal with that was, you know what? I erase it. I put it aside. I do not study Talmud. I do not study the Zohar because it's very mystic. I do not read these parts. There's Reform congregations that took out parts of the Torah reading in different days because it's challenging morally. Okay. But you have another take.
Yeah.
What's your take?
My take is that even if something is upsetting to me, and many times it has been very deeply upsetting, let me tell you, that is still something I'm engaging with, and I still get something out of it, even when I am challenged by it. And when I encounter the text, when I engage with it, when I talk about it, people may not agree with me. They may have a very different take on what that daf is conveying, but these are my reactions as this human being living in this body, in this life, and so they're going to be my own reactions. So when I do encounter something that is challenging, I want to know what it says. I remember one of my earliest understandings of how people external to Judaism think about the Talmud and talk about it is really, really horrible. Online you can find, the Talmud says XYZ horrific things. Like it says you can marry a child of 3 years in one day. Like it does say that. It says that. However, I did not have the tools to say what is actually the context here, or what does it say really? Because when people say, oh, the Talmud says this, that is not accurate. Sage XYZ says this in the name of sage this, that, and the other, and they don't agree. So to say the Talmud says this is not an accurate way to portray anything. You have to give who said it. These are human beings with good and bad ideas. And sometimes they say good ideas and sometimes they give bad ideas. But to cherry pick, you can't combat that unless you actually know what's in there. So that was one of the earliest things I had encountered online, that particular episode of talking about child marriage. And when I got to that page in Yevamot, I didn't make a joke about it, but I did make a video because I had remembered how horrible it was to come across that mention online and think, does it really say this? And then when you actually study it, you see it's horrible. It is horrible. And yet they are, in a very strange way, examining the boundaries of their thinking. It is a thought exercise. It's not actually telling people to go and get married to 3-year-old plus 1 day children. I still am deeply upset by its inclusion. It's still upsetting. It's still horrific. Plenty of people were like, well, it's different back then. I'm like, no, you don't understand. Marrying children at 3 years old was never a good idea. It was life endangering to them. They would have died. Are you insane? But because they're so defensive of the Torah, the Talmud, excuse me, they want to explain it away like life was different then. No, I'm sorry. get real. It was not. It was not that different in this regard. But what I did was I talked about it in a very straightforward way in the video. I didn't make it funny. I said, this is what's in here. It is really upsetting to encounter this as a modern learner, and even to think they're just doing a thought exercise. This may not have ever actually happened. Doesn't necessarily make it better. It still affects us. So in the video, I talked about how that day, because if that's what I read in the daf, I went and donated to an American organization that works with Orthodox survivors of sexual assault. And I said that when we encounter these things, I can't change anything that happened, 1800 years ago, 2000 years ago. I can't change that. All I can do is say, how can I be a better person now, be informed or changed by what I'm encountering, and take some kind of positive action now. So even when you're encountering something that's upsetting, that makes you feel so nauseous, and there's plenty of times in the Talmud that you really almost breaks
yes,
you.
a couple of days, and Ketubot has that different, like when a woman is being raped or seduced, then they only discuss the money goes to the father, all the money, half of the money. And it's a very disturbing place. There's an halacha that says, for example, if a woman is raped, but then the father dies, because according to the Torah, you need to give the penalty for raping a woman to the father. If you rape a woman and the father dies, you don't have to pay any penalty for that. You read those passages and you are like, and me as a man, I feel like as a woman reading the Talmud in the 21st century, much more, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There were that conversation or that discussion went on for weeks. It was weeks. It was weeks. And that's why I was like, oh, maybe I do want to go back to Yevamot. Geez. But that's exactly correct. There's so many moments that we encounter things that can be very triggering for those of us who are survivors of sexual assault, or who have been through something horrific. And I always think about that for people who are listening to my videos also, that they may have experienced something, and it's a disservice, it's disingenuous if I don't say occasionally, this video is not going to be funny, this is just my real reaction. And my real reaction is to be upset. It is to be struggling with this, and think about the women of that time. And not only the women, obviously men are victims of sexual assault as well. And I think about those people who are studying the text and may not feel comfortable to say anything, but they still have been survivors. I will say that there was a page in Chagiga, and this was really early on when people were first starting to pay attention to me, like a month or so after Moekatan 9 had gone viral, well, maybe a little bit more than a month, but it talked about, it was Chagiga 910. So I did kind of like a combo video. It talked about the Aguna issue, and it talked about rape and how if it was a Kohen's wife, she could not go back to him. And how horrible that was. And I then took that and discussed the ways in which the things discussed in the daf have real implications now for women who are agunot, certainly, and also women who are victimized by a male-dominated culture, a patriarchal culture, which we still exist in. And I connected these things together because they are connected. And I got a lot of messages from people, thanking me, sharing their experiences, which I was deeply moved. They trusted me with those experiences, but also men who were like, I actually never thought of making these connections because I have never studied with a person who said, yeah, I am also a survivor of this, and this is how it affects me. So in my mind, the more voices are involved in Talmudic study, and the more discussions are had with those diversity of experiences and diversity of identities, the better, because we all get to understand things in a better way.
Yes, and that's why I became like a fan. And I do not see every video, but every once in a while I watch them, and they are great. And I think we should be thankful for a generation that we are able to encounter the Talmud outside the walls. of traditional. Today, you don't have to know Aramaic, even though if you know Aramaic, you will understand more.
I don't.
If you know Hebrew, you will understand more. If you have a lot of background of Jewish learning, you will get more. If you go to a good yeshiva or a good rabbinical school, more. But still in your house without having to pay $1, but donations are appreciated.
Yeah.
You can get a lot, and those reactions, and not to be condescending to the Talmud, there's very troubling passages, but still, I think 1800 years ago, in a very patriarchal society, like you said, there's a lot of thinking about the well-being of women, right? We are still going through Ketubot, and a couple of weeks ago, or days ago even, we are talking about how many times, and it's a sugya that I always teach, and people laugh, how many times a husband is obligated to have sex with their wife, and they're not thinking, the rabbis, about the well-being of the husband, because the husband, accordingly, that time could have sex whenever he wanted, and he could have more than one wife.
Exactly.
The rabbis are thinking about the well-being of the wife, that according to the Torah, onata, having sexual relationship is an obligation. And if you're a camel rider, every once a month, if you sail a boat once every 6 months, if you are unemployed every day because you don't have anything good to do, and people just laugh with something that, wow, is interesting.
But it's actually, that's one of the moments you see this incredible dichotomy, right? You see the moments where you're like, I'm pulling my hair out, I can't deal with men, the sages, and how when they're talking about women's experiences, they never talk to women, they never invite commentary from women. We don't hear, they don't ask a woman. Except Abaye always mentions what his mom teaches him, which is, I appreciate that about Abaye. But in this case, and you know, I have to be honest, there are other cases where they are exhibiting a way of thinking that I appreciate. I'm not going to lie and say I hate it all. I don't actually. And this is one of the cases where people are like, no way, that's not on the Talmud, but it is. And it's one of the amazing things, as you say. This is a conversation where just like a couple weeks ago, we had to go through the whole eternal, like ongoing, unending rape convo. And now, plot twist, we have a sort of sex positive, I think we would say in modern words, way to think about it. Whereas they're talking about how important it is for a husband to actually make sure his wife is sexually satisfied in their relationship. And that's one of the obligations he owes her. Now, she owes him different obligations. And that's another part of the discussion in Tractate Ketubot, obviously. And we had a very funny daf just a few days ago about something else, but I will say in that regard, but I will say that I did a video about that issue of, men are required to satisfy their wives, and people loved that. They're like, oh, this is why I love Judaism. This is the challenge here, though. You have things that you're like, this is incredible. This is so forward thinking. This is epic. This is great. And at the same time, it's juxtaposed with less great elements, let's just say, those elements that we have talked about that are so deeply challenging. But you wouldn't get the good things if you didn't also struggle through the tough parts to learn. And that's why I really, really encourage anybody who is doing the learning. I mean, obviously, if someone's really struggling, I don't want them to feel horrible and keep pushing through if they can. But I really believe that studying it all as much as possible is really important to understanding the whole picture that we're trying to understand of this way of life, this mode of thinking, how traditions and practices and ways of viewing life have come down to us, Jews in the present era, and what influence that has had. It's, you know, often there's a direct correlation. How do we light the menorah? Hillel's way. We don't do it the House of Shammai way. Like, there's things that we do that are directly from the Talmud, and there's things that we don't do from the Talmud. But I think it's important to know from whence all this comes, the good and the bad.
I say amen to that. I say amen to that. I think it's just, I love the Talmud, you know. I love how the Talmud is so relatable to our, even those horrible stories.
Shockingly relatable sometimes.
And still, one of the things that I say to my students all the time is, there are no forbidden things to talk in the Talmud. Everything is up to the table. The way you have sex, the way you clean your ass, literally. The way of whatever, the way to masturbate, the way to eat, how you spit, if it's kosher or unkosher, the way you spit, or how much, or not davening a couple of yards away from the bathroom. Everything is part of life.
Demons.
I think the demons all around
Everywhere.
demons, 1,000 in one right hand, 10,000 in the left. I think everything is part of life. And as you said, our Jewish heritage, we always choose our path in between. There's even in the most extreme orthodox or literal way to understand, you cannot just have it all. Okay, it's not true, because you focus in something. And many times, like in the medieval times, all these stories that you talk mainly, and also I teach and I love, they skip it because that wasn't the real Talmud. The real Talmud, no, it's Hak al-Fasi, the Rif, Al-Hot. They just put away all those stories. And they also, the only thing that they mainly get was the halachic discussion. That's what it. But then you have the Ein Yaakov, that they took away all the laws. Okay, and they also only have all the Agadot, all the stories. But having both of them together, the ones that are really dry and the ones that are amazingly, it's only one line. It's all those lines that you can be thinking, wow, you have that moment that this is just the most beautiful book ever written. But it's everything there, like everything is in the Talmud, and but it's an effort. And I think what you are doing, what I'm doing, what hundreds of thousands of millions of Jews are doing in a constant base, studying half an hour, 1 hour each day in the yeshiva, or just listening to your TikToks or hearing me or whatever way they do, is a commitment to, everything is part of life. Everything that we like and we do not like, but it's good for us to know them,
Absolutely, absolutely. And sometimes people will say to me, how could you say this about the sages? They're so holy. How could you talk about them this way? And I'm saying, go read it, go study it. They say these things about themselves. Sometimes they're talking about every aspect of life, and not every aspect of life is pretty, and not every aspect reflects well on the sages necessarily, because they're real human beings. They were trying to do the best that they could in the situation that they could, and in preserving Judaism outside of how it had been practiced for so long after the expulsion, the exile, because of Rome destroying the whole situation. They had to write it down. They had to actually put this down and think about, how do we preserve this? How do we think through this? And I really I have so much respect, even when I disagree as a modern person, or I'm bothered as a modern person. Good Lord, just imagining the effort over these hundreds of years to have these conversations between the sages, these discussions from each generation of Amoraim over the space difference of the land of Israel and Babylonia. It's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing. So it's a privilege to get to learn it now. I truly believe that Jewish learning, and the Talmud specifically, is the birthright of all Jews. This is something that we all can have ownership in, and we can all get something different out of as it pertains to our individual lives and experiences.
I was just learning. I wanted to share with you because I think you will appreciate, Miriam. I was just learning Sefer HaChinuch, and in next week Torah portion, or this week Torah portion, I don't know when this video will go online, Parashat Elef, it says that it's the last 2 mitzvot in the whole Torah about Akel, the gathering with once every 7 years. The entire people of Israel should be together in the temple listening to the Torah. Men, women, elderly, young children, everybody needs to be there. And the Sefer HaChinuch says, why? Why do they do that? And he says, because nations of the world will see all the Jews in the temple, and they will ask, what in the name of God they are doing? When you're in the middle of the street and you see a crowd of people watching something, looking at some place, you see, what are they doing? What are they listening? Who is there? What famous person is there? And the Jews will answer to these Gentiles, we are studying Torah.
Yeah.
Yes, and this is our heritage, This is what we do together. We study, and what we do with what we study, it's up to us. But what we share is that idea. We share the Torah learning each week. We share the Daf Yomi each day. And I have a question for you, Miriam. Because I have you here. So a couple of days ago, 1-2 days ago, appears in the non-Jewish, in the Christian weddings, the priest said when somebody is getting married, in health, and how do they say it? Like for life or death,
until death, or like,
yes, but
as long as we both shall live.
Yes, but they say something like you need to support each other in health and not in healthy moments, like you need to be
in sickness and in health,
in sickness and in health.
And
I don't know if you remember, a couple of days ago we read in the Talmud just the opposite. If your wife or if your husband has a defect or just a very ugly odor in their mouth, or they collect excrement from dogs, and you can stand
divorce.
What do you take for? What's your reaction when you? What's your reaction when
you laugh super hard? And I have to say, I was once married for 9 years, and I think it is a dangerous thing to say in sickness and in health, no matter what, as long as we both shall live. What utopia are people living in? This is simply not the case. Sometimes you're with somebody who is very sick in a dangerous way to you. If they have a issue that they're struggling with, it actually is changing their behavior in a difficult way, which is what happened in my marriage, unfortunately. It can be dangerous to remain married. It can be destructive to remain married. Also, there are times that you just won't get along and it does not make sense, and you're then locked in to this trap. And I think about actually those pages that we just learned about reasons you can get divorced. And hilariously, I did a video on that, which is doing quite well. It was on Monday, actually. The one of the quote unquote defects that the sages discuss and then go into their personal preferences is boob shape and size.
Oh, 100, right?
Yes.
It's amazing.
So and then they're just like, well, this is what I think. This is what I think. It's hilarious, but also the bigger question is, there are certain issues with a person that people have the right to say, no, I'm going to pass on that. I actually don't want to get married or get divorced. Now, I don't think it's fair and equal, because obviously we know that in Jewish marriage, a man can end a Jewish marriage, but a woman cannot. So it's not quite. My reaction is always through that lens of that knowledge that yes, women should be able to say, you know what, there's something going on here. I do not like, it's not for me. This isn't mine. Hope for my relationship. There's a big problem here, whatever it is. I think we should get divorced. I think that's a vital thing for people to be able to do. Otherwise, it is a prison. Otherwise, sometimes I wonder why we have any expectation of people marrying fellow Jews, because essentially Jewish marriage will, by definition, certainly in Israel, where there is no secular marriage at all, trap women in a structure where they cannot escape necessarily. And I think about that every time I learn something where the sages are discussing, oh, well, this is grounds for divorce, that is grounds for divorce. They had a lot of grounds for divorce. But also, I think they're also trying to talk through it again. Maybe not how they actually practiced it. We have to remember that they also were trying to reconstruct how things would have happened during the temple era. And so I give them some leeway because they're also trying to figure it out. But I will say the conversation about boob size was very funny, and the viewers of DAF Reactions appreciated that.
And we need to start finishing our conversations. I will keep talking with you a long time, but Rosh Hashanah is getting here. So Rabbi, I think, is the one that always started with a milta de bedihuta, right? Rabbi was one of those rabbis that he started every sermon, every class in the yeshiva, according to the Talmud, with some joke. Okay, so jokes, making some fun of the Talmud. I think that's what you do with Daf Yomi. You teach through laughing, through like comic reactions. And we can both agree that the Talmud in some way, and you said it quietly right, I think, Miriam, sometimes consciously, sometimes there's a joke. There's a joke there. Sometimes no. Sometimes they really think, for example, in Masechet Sukkah, if you really can put a living cow, as part of one of the like doors, or I don't know, the walls of the sukkah. Unconsciously, that's
There's
funny.
If you
have guests, if you can put one after the other one, 10 people, one like just staying like that for the whole meal to fulfill the mitzvah of Leishe Sukkah. They're not trying to make a joke, but it's funny.
It is funny. It is, absolutely.
Just to finish, if you can, do you remember some other story or a like discussion, something that still makes you laugh or you want to share with us? I know that I'm putting you in the spot, but maybe one or two stories just to finish and give us your daft reaction to something. And maybe it's not about the Talmud, maybe it's another way, because I love this idea of reaction, how we react to a passage, a story, something.
So I will say that the story or the daf I was giving over when I spoke to those rabbis during the podcast, and the reason I thought, I can make this funny, I can make anything funny, if we're talking about the daf, Shabbat 110, I remember laughing so hard because it's not a joke necessarily, but the situation is inherently comical, because what they're talking about is, what if, hypothetical, and they always come out with like random hypotheticals. What if a snake sees a woman and it's like, I wanna have sex with that woman. What do we do? First, the woman is supposed to have sex with her husband, so the snake knows that she's taken. Then if that doesn't work and somehow the snake gets inside of her vagina, how do we get it out? Well, you make a barbecue, and essentially the snake will pop its head out and go, oh, what? And then you go and she gets the tongs and she takes it out and throws it in the fire, right? That's how it is. And it's just the thinking about how did they think of
get into that?
Like, it's absolutely hilarious. It's like sketch comedy material that is so ridiculous that I cannot help but laugh. But I will say also, I do enjoy some of the jokes that they make it of their own expense to each other. Sometimes when, Abaye says something snarky, especially, or it's actually one of the insults in that insult book. I forget to which sage it happens, but I think a group of children says to him, your teacher was a reed cutter in the swamp, which is just mocking him for filth and basically saying, absolutely nothing. Your teacher was a reed cutter in the swamp. There's a lot of sarcasm sometimes. There's a lot of disses in a very kind of modern sense that I appreciate.
Or like vinegar, son of wine. Right?
Yes.
You're like a vinegar son of wine. Like your dad, your rabbi was amazing. You are just vinegar. You're nothing.
Okay. This one is definitely, I feel like, the first your mama joke. I think it's Rabbi Chia. I hope I'm not incorrect about that. But he's studying. Is it Rabbi Chia? Okay. A sage, who I believe to be Rabbi Chia, but I will double check after and find out if I'm wrong. A sage is learning with his son, and they get to a section where it's talking about how just horrible women are horrible, they're the worst, and the son goes like who are they talking about? And the sage goes, like your mom. Yes. It's like, that is how could they not have meant that as comedy? I don't know how they could possibly not have meant it as comedy.
Yes, they are brutally honest. That's something also in our world.
No punches.
Everything is politically correct, and if you say a word that you shouldn't say because you are afraid of hurting someone, in this world that we live in, that comedy use a lot of our own defects, our own things to make comedy. The rabbis are brutally honest. They just talk their mind, and they are open. Yes,
but that's why I like them. I know that I criticize them a lot, but I like that they're human beings. I like that they are flawed. Sometimes I don't like what their flaws are, but I like and I'm encouraged by, yes, these are real people and there's greatness to them and also some other aspects sometimes, but they're real people. And therefore I have greater respect for them than if they were sainted, almost beings that, we can never aspire to really connect with that because it would be too holy, but they're real. And I like that.
With that, we start ending our conversation. Miriam, just saying thank you for sharing your time, your humor, your knowledge, your story with all of us. So for sure, I will put in the link,
thank you.
The link to your TikTok that's the main source, right? TikTok.
Yes, people can follow me on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube at Miriam Anzovin, and on Twitter, I am at Anzovina.
And
Miriam,
thank
you so much for having me. This is absolutely a joy.
There's a next DAF project, reaction project. What's coming next?
Well, I mean, after Simchat Torah, we're going to start the Torah again, and I feel like Parsha reactions are the next step.
That could be cool, so I'm waiting for those. Shana Tova umetuka and Hatima Tova.
Thank you so much. Shana Tova. Thank you so much for having me.
Nos vemos todos en un próximo episodio. Chau, chau.